I'm Natalie Quinn, a 34-year-old corporate lawyer, reviewing contracts for a multi-million-dollar merger when my phone vibrates. Dad's text glares up at me. Don't come to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. 20 years of conditional love distilled into 14 words. My finger hovers over the screen before typing a single word. Back. Understood. The client across from me has no idea that behind my professional smile, I've just made the decision to remove my name from my father, Lawrence Quinn's $2 million business loan. I've spent my life trying to earn his approval, but sitting here in my glass-walled office overlooking Chicago, I realize this text isn't an ending. It's freedom. Before I tell you what happened when I removed my name from that loan, let me ask, have you ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted? If so, keep listening. This is my story. I grew up in Beacon Hill, Boston's most prestigious neighborhood under the silent tyranny of perfection. Our brownstone loomed like a monument to appearances, each brick and brass fixture polished to hide the rot beneath. My earliest memories are not warm embraces or bedtime stories, but of my mother's cold fingers tilting my chin upward before every dinner party. Natalie, fix your posture. Shoulders back, chin up, smile softly, not so wide. Her voice was always quiet, controlled, lethal. My father, Lawrence Quinn, built his real estate empire brick by brick, dollar by dollar, life by life. He was revered in Boston, spoken about in boardrooms with respect bordering fear. At home, his approval was the oxygen we scrambled for. If he was silent at dinner, the air turned poisonous. If he spoke, it was only to Michael, 3 years older, groomed since birth to inherit Quinn properties. Michael absorbed our father's confidence like it was his birthright. For me, love was conditional, a ledger entry to be earned with perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect silence. I remember being 7, standing at the top of our sweeping mahogany staircase, watching Michael present his handmade model of our brownstone for a 3rd grade project. Father's smile was wide eyes gleaming with pride as he said, "That's my boy, a builder just like his old man." When I won first place in the state spelling bee that same week, Father glanced at my trophy and said only, "Don't let it distract you from real achievements." At 12, I stayed awake past midnight, writing an essay about justice that won a statewide competition. A local reporter wanted to interview me the following Saturday. My mother canceled it without asking. "You have a hair appointment. Appearances matter, Natalie. Your victory reflects on the entire family. You need to look the part." During the photo shoot, Michael was placed front and center, holding my award as if it were his. Every morning I woke to the sound of Mother's heels clicking down the marble hallways, orchestrating our lives. Like an opera director, each movement choreographed for maximum social impact. Breakfast was silent except for the clink of china, and Father's daily critique, "Michael, excellent initiative yesterday with your presentation. Natalie, eat less bread. You're getting soft." When I set my sights on Yale law, it wasn't a dream. It was oxygen, escape. Father's response cut deeper than any refusal. Harvard business would keep you closer to home, closer to Quinn properties, to us. His smile never reached his eyes. When Yale accepted me with a partial scholarship, Mother's hug was stiff. "We'll cover the rest," Father said, "but we expect you back here where you belong." But I didn't belong. Not there. Not in a home where love was an asset and children were investments. I worked 3 campus jobs to pay my own way, because every dollar from them felt like a shackle on my lungs. During holidays, I returned to a dinner table, where Michael's deals were met with champagne toasts, while my academic milestones were dismissed with "Pass the salt, Natalie." I learned early that affection was a currency I could never earn enough of, that Michael was the asset, and I the liability, a daughter born to reflect well but never outshine. To outsiders, we were the perfect Quinn family. Lawrence the real estate titan, Clara the socialite queen, Michael the golden heir, and me, Natalie Quinn. The daughter with a law degree she paid for herself sitting quietly at family dinners absorbing lessons I never wanted to learn. Beauty, I realized, was a currency too, and ours was counterfeit. But beauty, I learned early, can be a veneer stretched thin over rot. I learned the rules of my childhood before I could even read. Rule number 1, never speak, unless spoken to, especially at the dinner table where my father, Lawrence Quinn, reigned like a silent emperor. His approval or disapproval dictated the mood of every meal. His silence was suffocating. His words, when they came, carried a razor edge that cut deeper than any punishment. Rule number 2, perfection is not an achievement. It is a baseline expectation. My mother, Clara Quinn, enforced this with an iron will beneath her manicured softness. Every morning she inspected my uniform for lint, my socks, for even folds my hair for stray strands. If anything was out of place, her correction came swiftly and wordlessly. A tug, a pinch, a sigh of disappointment that made my stomach twist with nausea. Rule number 3, Michael first, always. My brother's need as achievements, moods, and whims superseded mine. If he was tired, I was to be silent. If he was angry, I was to disappear. If he succeeded, I was to clap. If I succeeded, I was to thank him for setting such a good example. Rule number 4, never embarrass the family. This one was unspoken, but omnipresent. Every move I made, every question I asked, every answer I gave in class was weighed against an invisible scale marked family image. When I asked my mother at 6 why she never kissed me goodnight, she placed a cold hand on my cheek and said, "Because affection makes children needy, Natalie. We raise leaders, not dependents." Rule number 5, your feelings are irrelevant. If I cried, I was told to stop seeking attention. If I showed anger, I was told to control myself. If I showed happiness too brightly, I was told not to gloat. My emotions were sanded down into silent compliance. Rule number 6, success is only useful if it serves the family. When I won the statewide essay competition at 12, my mother used my photo op to solidify her charity board position. My father used my academic ranking to negotiate a better loan rate with a banker whose daughter placed below me. I was not their child. I was their leverage. Rule number 7, never question these rules. Questioning was defiance, and defiance was weakness. That's not how the real world works. Natalie, my father repeated every time I asked why Michael could skip chores, or why I couldn't sit at the adult table during holidays, despite my straight A's. Fairness is an illusion for people without power. These were the rules that built me into someone I didn't recognize by adolescence. A girl with perfect posture, silent rage boiling in her chest, a mind full of strategies for survival, rather than dreams for the future. They stripped me down to a blank canvas they could paint their vision on a daughter who looked flawless. In photographs, never spoke out of turn, and learned to fold her pain into origami cranes of invisible resilience. But beneath the folded wings, I remained a child, desperate for warmth, for someone to look at me and see not a pawn or a tool, but a person worth loving. That longing carved canyons inside me that no amount of achievements could fill. I learned those rules so well that decades later, sitting in my Chicago office reading my father's final text, my instinct was not to scream or cry. It was to obey, to type, understood. Because rule number 8, the final rule I internalized without ever speaking it aloud was, this love is earned, and if they do not give it to you, it's because you're not good enough yet. Only later did I realize the truth. The rules were never about making me good enough. They were about keeping me small. My first act of rebellion wasn't loud. It didn't involve slammed doors or shouted curses. It was quiet, almost invisible. But it cracked something inside me that had been solid stone for as long as I could remember. I was 14. That afternoon, Mother spent an hour curling my hair into perfect ringlets for dinner with the Bradfords. As she pinned the final curl in place, she whispered against my ear, her breath warm and sour with coffee. "Remember, Natalie, tonight you are an extension of us. Don't speak unless spoken to. Smile when Mrs. Bradford compliments you. Sit with your ankles crossed and your hands folded. Don't ruin this." She said it the same way she always did, softly, like a prayer laced with threat. At dinner, Michael spoke confidently about his acceptance to an elite leadership camp, Father beaming with each syllable, his pride swelling to fill the room. I watched them from my silent place at the table, practicing my smile in the reflection of the polished silverware. The smile that said, "I am good. I am small. I take up no space you do not allow." Then Mrs. Bradford turned to me, her lipstick smudged on her teeth, and asked, "And what about you, dear? What do you enjoy?" I felt Mother's eyes boring into my cheek, urging me to say something safe. Piano, reading, quiet, acceptable things. But something cracked, and out came the truth, small and trembling, but still alive. "I like writing. I want to be a lawyer one day. I want to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." Mother's fork clattered against her plate. Father's eyes narrowed before his lips curled into that smooth, practiced smile that never reached his gaze. "Natalie reads too many stories," he said lightly. "She'll outgrow it." That night, Mother didn't speak. She brushed out my curls with rough, punishing tugs, each stroke tearing out strands of hair. Her voice was low and shaking with fury. "You embarrassed your father. Do you think the Bradfords want to hear about lawsuits and poor people at dinner? Do you think anyone wants to hear your opinions?" I bit my tongue so hard it bled iron in my mouth. Tears slipped down my cheeks, silent and hot. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. The world hadn't ended. The chandelier hadn't fallen. The earth hadn't cracked open to swallow me whole. I had spoken my truth, and the sky remained unbroken. The next act of rebellion came 2 years later. Father wanted me to take advanced business classes to prepare for Harvard Business School. That was the plan. That was always the plan. But when he handed me the course selection sheet, his pen heavy in my palm, I checked constitutional law electives instead. At 16, I read court opinions late into the night, by flashlight under my blanket, the words burning through me like wildfire. Ruth Bader Ginsburg whispered to me from the page, "Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. Fight, but fight wisely." When college applications came, Father laid out the Harvard Business School forms on his polished mahogany desk, the pen positioned neatly beside them. I sat there for a long time, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on my spine. Quinns went to Harvard. Quinns studied business. Quinns came home to build the empire. I put down the pen, opened my laptop, and submitted my Yale law application instead. My hands trembled as I pressed send, but inside me was a quiet roar, like an ember that had waited 14 years to catch flame. That night, lying in bed with the summer breeze breathing cool against my skin, I let myself imagine a future that wasn't theirs, a future that was mine. It was terrifying and thrilling, because rebellion wasn't destruction. It wasn't screaming or slamming doors. It was creation. The first trembling act of building a self not molded by Lawrence and Clara Quinn, but forged by Natalie Quinn. I didn't know then what that choice would cost me. I didn't know the taste of betrayal or the shape of exile. But as sleep claimed me, I remember thinking, Even if it costs everything, at least it will be a price I chose to pay. Leaving home was not cinematic. There was no shouting match, no slammed doors, no luggage dramatically thrown into a car. It was quiet. Almost eerily so. I left the way. A ghost slips out of a haunted house, unnoticed, unmissed, carrying my own unfinished business within me. When Yale's acceptance letter arrived, I opened it alone in my room. The sunlight filtering through the curtains cast golden stripes across my trembling hands. For a long time, I just stared at my name printed in stark serif font, thinking how foreign it looked under the seal of an institution that valued minds, not bloodlines. Then tears slid down my cheeks. Not tears of fear or sadness, tears of something that felt dangerously close to hope. I walked downstairs clutching the letter like a talisman. Father was in his office tapping out contracts, building towers in his mind. Michael was away visiting Harvard's campus, fulfilling Father's unspoken dreams. Mother was rearranging white roses in the foyer, silent judgment wafting off her perfume like an invisible mist. "I got in," I said. My voice was small, trembling, betraying the desperate little girl still inside me, who needed them to care, needed them to see her, to say her name and mean it. Mother didn't look up from her roses. "Yale is far." Father didn't turn from his laptop. "Harvard business keeps you closer to home." "I don't want to study business," I whispered. My throat burned. "I want law. I want my voice cracked open, raw and bleeding. I want to help people." Father closed his laptop softly. That quiet click felt louder than any slammed door. He turned to me with those assessing eyes that had weighed my worth since birth. "We'll cover what the scholarship doesn't," he said finally, each word clipped and precise. "But you will come back to Quinn Properties. You will use that degree for this family." Understood, I nodded because nodding was survival. But inside me, something had already broken free. It was small, flickering, fragile as a candle's flame, but it was mine. That summer, I packed my life into 2 suitcases. I folded every blouse with trembling hands, aware that no matter what I brought, I was leaving behind everything. Familiar, the scent of cedar polish in Father's office, the echo of Michael's laughter down the marble halls, the bone-deep knowledge that I was never enough. On my last night, Michael knocked softly on my door. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, his silhouette backlit by the hallway's golden glow. He looked at my boxes stacked by the wall, his eyes unreadable. A prince surveying the peasant who dared leave the kingdom. "Good luck at Yale," he said finally. "Don't forget where you came from." I wanted to hug him, to beg him to promise he'd visit, to confess how terrified I was. But we weren't that kind of siblings. We were Quinns. So I just nodded. "You too," I said softly. "Don't forget who you are." At dawn, Father carried my suitcases to the car in silence. His grip was tight, his jaw locked. Mother smoothed my hair with trembling fingers, but she didn't kiss my forehead. Their goodbye was a transaction tuition. Paid image, maintained, daughter disposed of for now. In the car, Father drove without speaking. The city blurred past the windows, brick and glass, and history streaking into nothingness. When we pulled up at South Station, he parked, turned to me, and said, in a voice stripped of softness, "Don't waste this. Remember who paid for it." I stepped out into the morning chill. The platform smelled of steel and diesel and burnt coffee. My suitcases rolled behind me, wheels clicking against cracked concrete like a countdown. When I boarded, I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because if I did, I knew the little girl inside me would scream and beg to go home, even if home was the place that had been killing her softly for years. As the train pulled away from Boston, rattling past ivy-covered brick buildings and sunlit harbors, I pressed my forehead to the cold window. My reflection stared back at me. Pale, unsteady eyes rimmed red. Freedom was not the blazing triumph I had imagined. It was quiet, uncertain, fragile as a newborn heartbeat. But for the first time, that heartbeat was my own. And as the city disappeared behind me, swallowed by distance and dawn, I whispered to the ghost I left behind, "Stay there. Haunt them if you must. I'm done being a phantom in my own life." Because rebellion was not destruction. It was resurrection. And I was ready to rise. At Yale, for the first time in my life, I could breathe. No one cared that I was a Quinn. No one watched how I held my fork or judged the angle of my smile. People only cared about what I thought, what I could argue, what I believed. My worth was not measured by the cut of my dress or the pedigree of my bloodline, but by the sharpness of my mind. My dorm room was small, its walls painted institutional cream, the mattress thin and scratchy. The radiator hissed at night like a restless ghost, but it was mine. Mine to arrange with cheap posters of RBG quotes, command hooks dangling half-broken mugs, and stacks of casebooks piled like cathedral spires beside my bed. The first week I woke up at dawn out of instinct heart-hammering, expecting Mother's clipped voice outside my door, or Father's footsteps echoing down the hall like a silent command. But the only sound was birdsong weaving through the open window, the leaves rustling in the courtyard below. For the first time, I let myself sink back into the thin mattress and sleep in curling beneath scratchy sheets that smelled faintly of bleach and freedom. I worked 3 campus jobs. Library assistant by dawn, shelving books with cold fingers as the sun rose pink across the Gothic towers. Dining hall staff by day, hair tied under a net, the scent of burnt toast clinging to my skin. Writing tutor by night, coaxing essays out of bleary-eyed undergrads in exchange for $10 an hour and a sense of purpose. My fingers smelled perpetually of dish soap and highlighters. My legs ached from walking across campus in worn-out flats that blistered my heels raw. But every ache was proof that I was building something of my own. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass doors of Sterling Library and not recognize the girl staring back. She looked exhausted, hair twisted into a messy bun with a pencil stabbed through it, dark circles bruising the soft skin beneath her eyes, sleeves rolled up to reveal wrists, ink-stained with citations and constitutional amendments. But there was a spark in her gaze I had never seen, in the polished mirrors of Beacon Hill, a wildness, a hunger, a freedom. I made friends who cared about ideas, not lineage. Sarah from Vermont, who dreamed of environmental law and doodled river systems on the margins of her notes. Priya from Queens, who could argue gender discrimination cases before breakfast while braiding her hair into a sleek plait. Jamal from Atlanta, who deconstructed constitutional precedent like poetry and scribbled Langston Hughes quotes in the corners of his briefs. They saw me. Not Natalie Quinn, the daughter. Not Natalie Quinn, the potential heir. But Natalie Quinn, the thinker, the writer, the future attorney. They asked what I believed in. They listened. They challenged me until my brain throbbed with ideas I had never dared to hold before. Every day at Yale, I stitched together a self separate from the family that birthed me. Each reading I annotated, each brief I wrote, each pro bono clinic I joined each time a professor called on me, and I answered with a clear, unwavering voice. These were bricks in a life I was building with my own hands. But it wasn't all light. At night, when the campus fell silent, and I lay alone under that squeaky ceiling fan, the shadows on the walls sometimes grew teeth. I thought of Father sitting behind his mahogany desk, Mother sipping white wine in the rose garden, Michael strolling through Harvard Yard with his golden future laid out before him. I wondered if they missed me, if they even noticed the shape I left behind. Some nights I cried silently into my pillow salt, soaking cheap polyester, and felt like that same little girl hiding under silk sheets in Beacon Hill. But then morning would come, and with it the smell of burnt coffee and fresh constitutional crises, and I would rise, because each dawn reminded me I was free. Poor, exhausted, terrified, but free. And each night before I closed my eyes, I would whisper into the darkness, tasting the words like honey on my tongue. This is mine. This is mine. This is mine. I met Ethan Brooks on a night when I had almost given up believing men could be anything other than weapons disguised as providers. It was a charity fundraiser my firm forced associates to attend. Networking opportunities, they called it, though it felt more like auctioning off pieces of your soul in exchange for strategic introductions. The ballroom was marble and gold chandeliers dripping crystal tears onto tables of perfumed donors with $1,000 smiles. Waiters drifted by with flutes of champagne and canapes I couldn't pronounce. I stood in the corner swirling cheap wine in an expensive glass, silently reciting cross-examination structures to keep my sanity. I had perfected invisibility by then. Neutral lipstick, a severe bun black dress just modest enough to blend into the army of female associates. Every time a partner glanced my way, I straightened my spine, forced my lips into an obedient smile, and wondered how many hours of billable time I was losing by standing here pretending to care about silent auction paintings of coastal lighthouses. Then I heard laughter, real laughter, not the delicate trills of socialite approval, but something deeper and contained, the kind that cracked ceilings and made walls irrelevant. I turned. There he was, Ethan Brooks. He was tall but not imposing shoulders, slightly hunched as though he spent his life folding himself down to eye level with teenagers. His hair was tousled like he'd run his hands through it 100 times that day. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms inked with faint chalk stains. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket, just navy slacks and a wrinkled white dress shirt that gaped slightly at the throat. A teacher, someone whispered behind me with thinly veiled disdain. Public school, English literature, volunteers' evenings with first-gen college applicants. Disgust rippled through the lawyer crowd like a bad smell. I felt it too. At first, not disgust for him, but for myself. For how instinctively I measured worth by titles and billable hours. For how quickly I thought he doesn't belong here. Because somewhere beneath my cynicism was the bitter truth that neither did I. But then he spoke. He was leaning down to talk to a student from his program, a girl in a thrift store dress standing small by the dessert table, clutching a plate of untouched petits fours. "Hey, kiddo," he said gently, his voice roughened by exhaustion, but threaded with warmth. "You belong in any room your feet can walk into. Don't let anyone here tell you otherwise." The girl nodded, her eyes filling with tears that didn't fall. And something inside me, something cold, cynical, and near death, twitched like it remembered how to feel warmth, how to feel anything other than performance. We didn't speak that night. I left early, suffocated by the scent of privilege and rosewater perfume, the hollow applause echoing in my ears long after the ballroom doors closed behind me. But days later, we met again at a scholarship award reception for first-gen students. I was there as pro bono counsel, advising them on grant disbursement contracts. He was there as their mentor, pacing the hallway with stacks of folders under his arm and hair falling into his eyes. Our eyes met across the folding chairs and stale coffee cups. For the first time in years, I felt my mouth curve into an uncalculated smile, the kind that reached my eyes before I could stop it. When he introduced himself, his handshake was firm, but his eyes soft. "Natalie Quinn, corporate law." I said the words falling out sharp and automatic, like blades. He grinned, a flash of crooked teeth and mischief. Ethan Brooks, professional dream enabler, high school English teacher. Teacher. I heard my mother's voice in my skull dripping with scorn. A teacher, Natalie. Really. But his eyes held no apology, no shame. Just quiet certainty that stabbed straight through my armored cynicism. A certainty that didn't need defending. We talked for hours after the event, long after the students had gone, and the janitor began stacking chairs. He asked questions no man had ever asked me before. Not about my job or salary or where I saw myself in 5 years, but about books I loved as a child. The first sentence that ever made me cry. The day I decided to become a lawyer, not for prestige, but for justice. The most beautiful line of prose I had ever read. No one had asked me about beauty in years. By midnight, I felt raw and exposed, stripped of my Quinn polish, left trembling in my own truth. The kind of trembling that wasn't fear, but the tremor of something waking after a long, brutal sleep. And when he brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear, calloused thumb, grazing my cheekbone, and said softly, "You're extraordinary, Natalie Quinn." I hope you know that something in me shattered, not with pain, but with relief, because for the first time I realized love didn't have to feel like being measured and found wanting. Love could feel like oxygen. Love could feel like walking out into dawn after years locked underground. Like tasting sunlight for the first time. Like breathing without bracing for impact. Our first date wasn't candlelight or violins. There were no white tablecloths or overpriced cocktails designed to impress. It was a cracked leather booth in a corner diner 2 blocks from campus, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and a bell over the door that jingled every time someone walked in to escape the cold. The smell of burnt coffee and caramelized onions curled through the air like comfort and exhaustion entwined. Ethan ordered pancakes with extra syrup, smiling at the waitress with that unguarded grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. When she raised an eyebrow at his order, he just laughed, tapping the menu lightly. Midnight pancakes fix everything, he said. I ordered black coffee. My hands shook slightly when I lifted the chipped mug to my lips. I'd faced CEOs who bled arrogance, outmaneuvered opposing counsel in billion-dollar mergers, shredded witnesses twice my age on the stand. But sitting across from him, a public school teacher in rolled-up sleeves and ink-smudged fingers, I felt unsteady in ways I couldn't define. Like he saw through every steel wall I had spent years erecting. Like he saw me. He noticed. He didn't flinch away from my trembling. Instead, he reached across the sticky Formica table, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, with a gentleness that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Like something I had been searching for in dreams I never allowed myself to remember. "Why law?" he asked softly, voice roughened by fatigue and something deeper. Something like curiosity stripped of judgment. I opened my mouth to recite my usual line about justice and corporate leverage, the polished, weaponized answer partners love to hear. But the words tasted like dust. I swallowed, feeling my throat burn, because I paused, staring down at the dark swirl of coffee in my mug. My reflection trembled there. Because I know what powerlessness feels like. My voice cracked open, raw and unarmored. I want to make sure no one feels that way, if I can help it. When I glanced up expecting pity or discomfort, I found his eyes locked on mine, bright with something I hadn't seen in a man before. Pride, not ownership, not calculation, just pride. He nodded slowly, like he was tucking that truth of mine into his chest for safekeeping. Why teaching, I asked, needing the attention off me, needing to stitch myself back together before I fell apart in front of him. His grin softened into something almost reverent. Because every kid deserves someone who sees them before the world tells them who to be. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The diner hummed around us with clinking forks and low jazz crackling through old speakers. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the sidewalks in silent silver. We talked until the diner closed. Our pancakes went cold and rubbery, the coffee turned bitter and burnt. But neither of us moved, as if shifting would break the fragile, perfect spell cast between midnight and dawn. When he finally walked me home, we didn't touch. He kept his hands buried in his coat pockets, his breath misting in the freezing air. At the entrance to my apartment building, he stopped under the flickering street lamp light and shadow dancing across his face. He didn't reach for my waist, didn't lean in with hungry lips or eyes flicking to my mouth. Instead, he looked at me with unflinching gentleness and said, "Good night, Natalie Quinn. Sleep knowing there is at least one person in this city who thinks you're enough." I wanted to reply, to say thank you, or that he terrified me in the best way, or that I hadn't felt enough since I was 8 years old, hiding under my father's mahogany desk while he yelled at Mother about brand reputation. But my throat closed around the words, so I just nodded, turned my key in the rusting lock, and slipped inside before my tears could spill. That night alone in my apartment overlooking Chicago's fractured skyline, the windows rattling with winter wind, the radiator clicking. In protest, I sat on my narrow bed and pressed my fingers to my lips, where his words still burned. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe him. Just for a moment, just long enough to fall asleep, with a trembling smile ghosting across my face, dreaming of a world where love felt like oxygen instead of a noose. Meeting Ethan Brooks was easy. Introducing him to the Quinn family was a war I didn't know I'd signed up for. It was Thanksgiving. The brownstone gleamed with polished brass crystal chandeliers, refracting cold winter sunlight onto imported Persian rugs. Mother had arranged orchids down the center of the dining table, each bloom whiter than bone, their curved petals rigid and immaculate. The air smelled of roasted turkey, expensive candles, and something colder underneath like ozone before a lightning strike. Father sat at the head reading financial projections between sips of espresso, his brow furrowed in perpetual calculation. Michael hovered near the windows, murmuring into his phone, orchestrating deals even on holidays, his tailored blazer catching stray shafts of sunlight like polished armor. Ethan walked beside me, cradling a pie he'd baked that morning. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and brown sugar curled into the air between us, a scent of warmth and home I hadn't felt since childhood. Thanksgiving spent hiding under the kitchen table away from Mother's sighs and Father's silent disappointment. When my mother opened the door, her eyes slid over him, like he was a stain on the marble floor she'd just had polished. Natalie. Her voice was tight, each syllable strung taut with judgment. "You didn't mention you were bringing someone." "This is Ethan," I said. My throat felt raw as if I'd swallowed glass shards. "My partner." Father didn't look up from his laptop. Michael turned eyebrows raised, his smile tinged with pity. The same smile he wore as a boy, when he found wounded sparrows in the garden before snapping their necks to end their suffering. A teacher, my mother said, finally lips curling into something that was not quite a smile. How quaint. Ethan stepped forward, extending the pie with that quiet, unassuming grace of his. "Mrs. Quinn, Mr. Quinn," he said warmly. "Thank you for having me. Happy Thanksgiving." Mother took the pie between manicured fingers, holding it like it might contaminate her diamond bracelets. "You bake, I teach my students cooking metaphors for literature," he replied with a gentle grin. "Pie crust is structure, filling is theme, silence." The room felt like a vacuum. All the oxygen sucked out, leaving only the scent of orchids and roasting turkey and the faint chemical tang of floor polish. My heart pounded against my ribs so loudly I thought it might fracture bone. Father finally looked up. His eyes flicked over Ethan's thrift store blazer, his scuffed brown shoes, the faint chalk smudges on his rolled sleeves. Then his gaze settled on me cold and assessing as though weighing me on invisible scales. "Sit," he commanded. Dinner was a performance, as it always was. Michael discussed acquisition strategy for Quinn Properties' upcoming high-rise development in the Seaport District. Mother praised him between delicate forkfuls of turkey, her diamonds catching the chandelier light with every graceful gesture. Father interjected with financial projections, market volatility analyses, and offhand mentions of political donations to ensure permits moved swiftly. Ethan listened politely, his hand resting lightly over mine beneath the starched linen tablecloth. His thumb traced slow circles on my knuckles, grounding me each time I felt myself drifting away from my body into the old familiar void. Finally, Father turned to him. His tone was soft, almost conversational, though each word dripped with precision, honed like a blade. "So, Ethan, what do you plan to contribute to Natalie's future?" Ethan blinked, surprised by the directness. He glanced at me, then back at Father. "I plan to love her," he said simply. His voice didn't waver. "To support her. To build a life that feels real." Father's laughter was low and sharp, like the snap of dry ice dropped in boiling water. "Love doesn't pay for 4-story brownstones and legacy trusts." Ethan didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, eyes calm and steady. "No, sir. But it builds a family worth coming home to." The table fell silent. Mother's fingers tightened around her wine glass until the diamond on her ring cut white crescents into her skin. Michael glanced at me, pity replaced by something softer. Regret, maybe, or shame, or a fleeting memory of the boy he'd been before he learned that love was a liability. When dessert came, Ethan complimented the homemade pumpkin mousse. Mother corrected him briskly. "It's catered. We don't have time to bake." He only nodded, swirling his coffee. "That's a shame," he said quietly. "Baking slows you down enough to see what really matters." After dinner, Ethan offered to help clear the plates. Mother declined with a tight smile, waving him away like an incompetent intern. Michael retreated to his childhood bedroom to take investor calls. Father returned to his laptop, dismissing us with a flick of his eyes. That night in the guest room, where childhood nightmares still lived in the corners, shadows shaped like disapproval, and silence sharpened into weapons, I curled into Ethan's chest and sobbed until dawn. I cried for the girl I had been in that room, for the woman I was becoming, and for the war I had just declared by loving him openly in a house built to suffocate truth. He held me without speaking, his thumb tracing invisible promises into my shoulder. Promises of pies baked at midnight, of laughter that cracked ceilings, of children raised to believe they belonged in any room their feet could walk into, because the war had only just begun. And for the first time in my life, I knew which side I was fighting for. I lay awake long after Natalie had drifted into exhausted sleep, her breath trembling against my chest in quiet, broken exhales. The ornate guest room was silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock down the hall each second, chipping away at my composure, echoing through the hollow spaces of the Quinn mansion like a distant war drum. I stared at the darkened ceiling, tracing the patterns of plaster molding, illuminated by moonlight, filtering through sheer curtains. Everything in this house was curated to perfection. The imported rugs, the mahogany dressers, the crystal lamp, casting fractured rainbows across the floorboards. Beauty layered over rot. I thought about dinner, the cold smiles stretching tight across practiced faces, the sharpened questions disguised as polite conversation. Lawrence Quinn's dismissive gaze that stripped me down to nothing more than my salary, my calloused hands, the faint chalk smudges on my rolled sleeves. Clara Quinn's frozen elegance, her eyes moving over me like I was a stain someone else would have to scrub clean later. I wanted to rage, to stand fists clenched and tell them they were fools, that they were blind, that they spent their lives worshipping marble and dividends and legacy, while failing to see the brilliance sitting right beside them, brilliance that glowed with an intelligence and compassion none of them could ever hope to touch. But instead I had sat in silence, gripping her trembling fingers under the tablecloth, fighting to stay calm, for her sake, fighting not to become another man who raised his voice and made her flinch. Looking down at her now curled so tightly into herself. Despite my arms around her, my chest ached with a protective fury I had never felt before. Her face was tucked into the hollow of my throat, lashes damp against flushed skin. She looked so young in sleep, so fragile and unarmored, stripped of the steel-edged composure she wore like battle regalia every waking moment. I thought of my students' kids who came to me every day, broken by the world's indifference, kids with eyes that never looked up from the floor until someone told them they mattered, until someone showed them they were seen. I saw Natalie the same way, saw every fractured shard of her every quiet hope and hidden terror, saw the way her father's words carved invisible wounds across her soul, saw the desperate strength it took for her to keep breathing in a house that suffocated her with silent expectations and weaponized love. My hand stroked down her spine, feeling the tremors even in sleep. I pressed my lips to her forehead, tasting salt and lavender shampoo, and something that felt like a prayer whispered into the dark. "You are enough," I murmured, my voice trembling, with a rage so quiet it burned. Even if they never see it, even if they never say it, you are enough. The grandfather clock ticked on. The shadows shifted across brocade wallpaper like silent ghosts bearing witness, and I lay awake, eyes burning with unshed tears, promising myself with a ferocity that bordered on violence. No matter how ugly this war became, no matter how many scars it carved into her, I would never let her fight it alone. Not while I still drew breath. I stood before my father in the cavernous dining room, my pulse pounding so loudly, I wondered if he could hear it. Crystal chandeliers loomed overhead, refracting cold light across polished mahogany and bone-white orchids arranged with surgical precision. The air smelled of roses and lemon polish, but beneath it lingered the stench of rot, years of suppressed anger and silent compliance decaying in my lungs. Lawrence Quinn tapped his crystal glass with a silver fork to command silence, as he had done my entire life. The sharp chime cut through the room like a blade. "Natalie," he said, his voice dripping with controlled condescension, each syllable a noose around my name. "This behavior is unbecoming of a Quinn. Sit down." I remained standing. My legs trembled, knees weak, but my spine felt forged from iron. "No." Clara Quinn's eyes widened the first crack in her porcelain facade. Michael froze mid-sip, his water glass suspended near his lips. Ethan watched from his seat beside me, shoulders tense, hands curled into silent fists, ready to intervene if my father's rage turned physical. No, Lawrence's tone dropped an octave, the threat beneath it unmistakable. He set his glass down with delicate precision, as though restraining the urge to shatter it. "Sit down." "No," I repeated, my voice trembling but unbreakable. "I won't sit. I won't stay. I won't pretend I'm part of this family anymore. Because I'm not. I've never been." For a moment, silence reigned. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to hold its breath. Then my father stood looming over me with the towering authority that had once terrified me into obedience. His gaze burned with a cold, furious disappointment. "You ungrateful girl," he hissed, each word curling with venom. "Everything you are, everything you have is because of me." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I forced them back. I would not let him see me bleed. Everything I have I built despite you. Not because of you. I said, my voice soft but sharp enough to draw blood. You taught me to survive humiliation. You taught me to swallow pain until it tasted like nothing. But you never taught me love. I had to teach that to myself. His eyes' narrowed face mottled with rage. He reached for my arm fingers, clawing through the air to seize me. But before he could touch me, Ethan stepped forward. He moved with calm, unflinching certainty, placing himself between me and my father. His gaze locked on Lawrence with a silent warning that spoke louder than any threat. Lawrence hesitated. His hand hovered mid-air, trembling with impotent fury. Before he let it fall to his side, Michael cleared his throat, the sound brittle, his voice breaking the tension like cracking ice. Dad, maybe we should just let her. Stay out of this. Lawrence snapped the words, ricocheting off the marble walls. I looked at my brother, seeing regret swimming behind his dark eyes, swirling with guilt and fear. But I knew it was too late. There were fractures no apology could mend, wounds too deep for family ties to stitch closed. I'm leaving, I said simply, my voice suddenly calm, like the eye of a hurricane. And I'm taking myself with me, the real me, not the daughter you created for your magazine covers. I turned to leave, but my mother's voice cut into my back like a scalpel. Natalie Clara whispered, her tone trembling with desperation and polished horror. Don't do this. Think of the family name. I paused at the threshold, feeling the cold marble under my heels, Ethan's presence behind me like a shield of warmth. I looked over my shoulder, meeting my mother's tear-bright gaze with unwavering clarity. I am thinking of the name I said, each word falling like a gavel. Mine, Natalie Quinn. Not your daughter, not his pawn, just me. Clara flinched, her lips parting in a silent plea that never formed. Without waiting for a response, I turned away. I walked out of the dining room with my head high heels, clicking across marble floors, each step heavy with finality and liberation. Ethan followed close behind, his hand resting lightly on my lower back as we crossed the foyer, where portraits of Quinn patriarchs lined the walls like silent judges. At the front door, I paused. The cold winter air seeped through the glass, biting my skin, but I felt alive for the first time in years. I felt the burn of tears behind my eyes, but blinked them back, refusing to offer my pain as tribute to a family that never knew what to do with my softness, except sharpen it into armor. I stepped out into the dawn light, Ethan beside me, the brownstone looming behind us like a mausoleum. And for the first time in my life, I walked away from my father's kingdom without looking back, because the only legacy worth carrying was the one I chose for myself. I didn't speak as we walked down the front steps of the Quinn brownstone, my heels clicking sharply against the marble, like a final declaration of independence. The sun had barely risen, casting a bruised lavender light across the silent street. Cold air bit at my cheeks, turning them pink with something that felt like shame and freedom intertwined. Ethan walked beside me, silent but solid. His warmth anchored me in a world that suddenly felt too wide, too empty, and too full all at once. We reached the rental car parked along the curb. Frost coated the windshield in delicate white veins. Ethan unlocked the door and held it open for me, but I didn't move to sit. I just stood there staring back at the house that built me and broke me in equal measure. Memories flickered across my mind like an old silent film. Mother's cold hands tightening my hair into painful braids before dinners I was never allowed to speak at. Father's disappointed sighs when my grades weren't first in class, the way his lips twisted around the word acceptable, like it tasted rotten. Michael's easy smiles that always felt just out of reach, like he was a sunbeam I could see but never stand in. I remembered piano recitals where my fingers bled from overpractice. Birthday parties that felt like board meetings. The way my mother would brush my hair so hard, I thought my scalp would peel off whispering, "Beauty is pain, Natalie." Remember that? Ethan placed a hand gently on my back. His touch radiated warmth through my wool coat, grounding me in the present. "What is it?" He asked, his voice low and careful, like he already knew, but wanted me to say it aloud. I swallowed hard. My voice came out small, almost childlike. I kept thinking if I just achieved enough, if I became everything they wanted, they'd finally love me. The words hovered in the dawn air, crystalline and fragile, before shattering into silence. His hand slid up to my shoulder, squeezing firmly. I felt his thumb press against the tense muscle of my neck, melting something frozen there. "They don't know what love is, Natalie. But you do. That's why you're different." Tears burned my eyes sharp and sudden, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now, not in front of the house that would drink them like wine and call them weakness. I drew in a long, shuddering breath and let it out slowly, feeling the shaking in my chest settle into something like resolve, like the echo of steel being forged. "Let's go." I whispered, my voice steadier this time. He nodded and leaned in to kiss my temple, his lips lingering against my skin, in a silent vow I felt down to my bones. Then he helped me into the passenger seat, closing the door gently, like sealing away something precious. As he drove us away, I kept my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching the brownstone shrink behind us, its granite walls catching the pale morning light. It stood there silent and imperious, a monument to a family that taught me how to bleed elegantly. I watched until Beacon Hill's winding streets turned, and the house disappeared behind rows of iron fences and leafless trees. Only then did I let out a breath I felt I had been holding since I was 5 years old. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from home. I was running towards myself, towards the woman I had always been beneath the polish and the pain, towards a life built on warmth instead of fear, towards a love that felt like oxygen. And as the city woke around us in muted gold and blue, I closed my eyes against the sunrise and allowed myself just for a moment to believe in a future where my name meant freedom instead of failure. I sat in my Chicago office, the city's skyline spread beneath me like a kingdom I had conquered alone. Towers of glass and steel caught the morning sun, throwing fractured gold across my window. Down below, cars crawled through streets lined with sycamores, horns blaring in the familiar symphony of urban ambition. From this height, the world felt small, manageable, almost mine. On my desk lay the signed Willis merger contract embossed and initialed a neat testament to months of 3 a.m. strategy sessions and 90-hour weeks. Next to it sat my half-empty coffee cup lipstick, smudged on the rim. The bitterness on my tongue tasted like victory. My phone buzzed for the 100th time that week. Lawrence Quinn. Voicemail again. I pressed play. His voice burst through the speaker, crackling, with barely controlled rage. "Natalie, call me back immediately. Your childish stunt has triggered accelerated repayment clauses. Do you understand what that means? Fix this. Now!" I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. Across from me sat Jennifer Murphy, my personal attorney, efficient in navy cashmere and pearl studs, reviewing paperwork with the precise detachment I had come to value. "Once you sign this," Jennifer said, tapping the thick stack of forms with a manicured finger, "you'll be fully removed from the $2 million loan guarantee. Your father will have 30 days to provide alternative collateral or refinance under stricter terms." I exhaled slowly. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the pen. I welcomed the tremor. It reminded me that this choice was real, consequential, that freedom never came without cost. "Are you sure?" Jennifer asked gently, though her eyes flickered with respect beneath professional neutrality. My gaze burned with clarity. He cut me out of the family. By text message, I said, my voice calm and cold as lake ice. "This is just me cutting the last chain they have on me." I thought back to childhood dinners where I was required to recite current events between forkfuls of asparagus, to the silent rides home after debate tournaments I won but not perfectly enough, to my father's dismissive smirks, my mother's soft, complicit sighs, Michael's pitying gaze that always felt like an obituary written for someone still alive. And then I thought of Ethan's words the morning we left Boston. "You don't owe them your peace." With a swift, decisive stroke, I signed my name, Natalie Quinn. The letters unfurled across the page like a battle flag planted in conquered soil. "Free woman." Jennifer nodded crisply. "I'll file it with the bank this afternoon. Expect calls." "They can call my assistant," I said, slipping the pen into my blazer pocket with surgical precision. "I'm busy building something real." My phone buzzed again. Michael this time. "Becca, what are you doing? Dad's furious. The accountants are panicking." I stared at the message at the nickname, only he used the last thread tying me to a life I had outgrown. For a fleeting moment, grief flickered in my chest. Grief for the sister I could have been to him, for the brother he almost was to me. But the ache passed, leaving behind only resolve. I typed back, "Not my crisis anymore." Then I turned my phone to silent, placed it face down on the polished walnut desk, and looked out at the city I'd claimed through my own mind, my own sacrifice, my own unstoppable will. For the first time, I felt truly untethered. No chains, no obligations, no illusions, no Quinn empire looming behind my shadow, threatening to swallow me whole. Just Natalie Quinn. Exactly as I was meant to be. And as the sun climbed higher, flooding my office with sharp, brilliant light, I allowed myself the smallest, fiercest of smiles, because freedom was never given, it was taken. And I had just taken mine back. Ethan watched me from across my office, leaning against the door frame, as I signed the final documents severing me from the Quinn empire. He'd never seen my hands shake before, not even during court prep at midnight, or crisis calls with billion-dollar clients. But today they shook, and he understood exactly why. He saw my chest rise and fall, as if each breath burned its way out. My eyes flickered with memories he could only imagine, childhood dinners where I sat in visible contracts. I was forced to sign to prop up an empire that never loved me. Silent screams, swallowed behind perfect smiles. When Jennifer left, Ethan walked to my side. I sat staring at the city, knuckles white, where I gripped the chair arms. Gently, he placed his hands over mine, feeling the tension vibrating through my bones. "This isn't just about the loan," he said softly. My eyes stayed on the skyline, glassy with tears I refused to shed. "It's everything," I whispered. "It's them. Their approval, their dismissal, their chains." I thought cutting financial ties would feel triumphant, but it just feels quiet, final. He knelt beside my chair, forcing me to meet his gaze. "It's supposed to feel quiet. That's what real freedom sounds like. Silence, peace. No more voices telling you who you should be. Just you." I blinked, tears finally spilling. "I don't even know who that is yet." "That's okay," he said, squeezing my fingers. "Because now, for the first time, you get to find out." I laughed shakily, tears dripping onto my sleek black trousers. "You make it sound so easy." "No," Ethan smiled. "But I'll be here while you figure it out." He pressed his forehead to mine, breathing in the scent of my lavender shampoo, the metallic bite of city air drifting through the office windows. And in that quiet, he felt something shift inside me, like a chain unhooking from bone, because I had just become the freest woman he knew. I woke the next morning before dawn light from the city glowing like embers against my bedroom curtains. For the first time in my life, there were no texts demanding my presence, no voicemails dripping with disappointment, no silent expectations hanging in the air like blades over my throat. There was only quiet. For a moment, it terrified me. I sat up slowly, listening to my own heartbeat. It sounded louder now, stronger, real. Ethan slept beside me, one arm reaching across the empty stretch of bed where I had lain awake thinking about who I was, without Quinn properties, without Lawrence's scorn, without Clara's judgment, without the weight of their silent demands defining my worth. I slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom mirror. For a long time, I just stood there staring at my reflection. My hair was mussed, dark circles shadowed my eyes. My skin was pale with exhaustion. But I was there, raw, unfiltered, entirely mine. I whispered to my reflection, "Who are you now?" And for the first time, I didn't flinch at the question. Later that morning, I sat across from Dr. Levine, the therapist I had reluctantly started seeing months ago. I spoke quietly at first, then with growing certainty. I told her about the dinner, the final confrontation signing away the loan, about the silence that remained. I thought I would feel triumphant. I admitted, my voice cracking. Instead, I just feel empty. Dr. Levine nodded, her gaze soft and knowing. Of course you do. You spent 34 years filling yourself with their demands. Their rejection doesn't erase that weight overnight. Emptiness is not failure, Natalie. It's space. Space to build something new. I felt tears slide down my cheeks. I let them fall. I didn't wipe them away. They felt cleansing. What do I build in that space, I asked. Dr. Levine smiled gently. Yourself, as you are not as they wanted you to be. You'll grieve what you never had. You'll rage at what they stole from you. But then slowly, you will choose who you are. And you will realize you were never theirs to define. I sat in silence, feeling my heart beat steady and sure within my chest. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was enough. I closed this chapter of my life knowing it was never about them. It was always about me, about the girl who learned to stay silent so as not to break their illusions, and the woman who finally learned her silence was breaking herself. I don't know what comes next. Maybe I will build a new empire, brick by bloody brick, with love as mortar instead of fear. Maybe I will rest for the first time in 34 years. Maybe I will simply breathe and let that be enough for now. If my story echoes something inside you, if you've ever been the child who was never enough, the lover who was never chosen, or the woman who had to walk away to find herself, tell me below. Because stories like ours deserve to be spoken into existence to remind each other we are not alone. If you want to walk this journey with me of reclaiming worth, rewriting legacy, and learning to love without conditions, subscribe, follow, and share this with someone still fighting to breathe, because I am Natalie Quinn. And for the first time in my life, I am finally mine. I thought signing away the loan would be the end. I thought freedom was silence, peace, and empty mornings with no demands. But that was before I found the letter. It was hidden behind a false panel in Father's office, wedged between dusty ledgers of offshore accounts. A single cream envelope sealed in blood-red wax. Inside were 5 names, 2 account numbers, and a note in Father's handwriting, in case she ever becomes a threat. My fingers trembled as I read it under the dim glow of his banker's lamp. Outside, Boston lay quiet beneath winter snow, unaware that tonight a dynasty was cracking open at its foundations. Because he knew. He always knew I would become exactly what he feared most, the daughter too dangerous to control. Too smart to keep silent, too ruthless to love without conditions. I folded the letter with surgical precision, slid it into my coat pocket, and walked out of his office for the last time. He thought cutting me out would break me. He had no idea. By sunrise, his empire would be in flames, and every last person on that list would finally know exactly what he'd done to keep his kingdom intact. Thank you for reading my story today. Your presence, your reflections, and your silent strength mean more than words can say. If this journey resonated with you, if it ignited something quiet and brave inside, you know that you are not alone. I will see you again in the next chapter where secrets burn, legacies crumble, and freedom is finally reclaimed. Until then, stay fierce, stay honest, stay yours. With all my gratitude, Natalie Quinn.